Hi, welcome back. Today I am here to review Black Leopard Red Wolf by Marlon James. I did receive an advance reader's copy for review from Riverhead Books, so thank you so much to them for sending me a copy. I finished this book and I have a lot of thoughts on it, guys, a lot of thoughts, and so I wanted to share them, especially because there's been a lot of buzz about this book and I anticipate this being one of the bigger, more talked about books of the year. Marlon James is the author of A Brief History of Seven Killings, which was a Man Booker Prize winner recently. This is the first in an adult fantasy series that's being billed as a African Game of Thrones. I have a lot of thoughts. I sat down and wrote my review for Goodreads recently and I wrote like an essay. It was probably the longest book review I've ever written. Ultimately, I do think this is a very well-written book that does a lot of important things, but I definitely don't think it's going to be the book for everyone, and I think you should probably be a little bit aware of what you're getting yourself into before you pick it up. So let's talk about what Black Leopard Red Wolf is and isn't, why you might want to pick it up, and reasons that it might not be the book for you, depending on your taste. I was basically sold on the African Game of Thrones thing because that just sounded amazing. Having read the book now, I will say with the Game of Thrones relationship, I can kind of see the connection in the second half of the book, but I'm not sure it's the most helpful comparison to make when talking about this, because I don't think it gives you what you might be expecting having heard that. That being said, this is a very dark, very gritty fantasy novel with incredible world building, well-developed characters, and I would say that the main theme in this book is violence enacted on people's bodies by those in positions of power. And that plays out in quite brutal and explicit fashion in lots of different ways with lots of different people throughout the book. And this is why I think you should know going in that this is not going to be a book that everybody's going to be able to read or want to read. It is quite difficult and it is quite dark, but I think what it does is important. So let's get into this. When I say violence enacted on bodies, this canon should be interpreted to mean a wide variety of things. This includes things like rape, female genital mutilation, homophobic behavior, murder, killing of children and infants, torture, sexual abuse of children, slavery. Basically, like all of the different ways that violence can be done to a person's body, you are going to see here in graphic, pretty horrific detail. So yeah, this is a very dark book. Maybe one of the darkest books that I've ever read. But man, does it unpack it? Does it unpack what that violence looks like and the ways that it can be so intrinsic to our society, and that this is not something that only men can enact on women, but it is something throughout this book that is experienced by men, women, and children, and where the violence is done by or supported by men, women, and children in positions of power. There is at one point in the book a queen who rapes a male character. And we get this great little discussion there of how male physical response to sexual stimuli is not the same thing as consent. Also, it's really clear that the author put a lot of thought into the fact that women are often subject to these sorts of violence and oppression in systemic ways that men simply aren't. And so there's a lot of like sort of feminist thinking that bleeds in here. But one thing that you should also know is that this is a very queer novel. It is own voices. The author is a gay black man, and our main character is also a gay black man, and that thematically plays a big role throughout this book as well. If you look here, I don't know if you can tell, but the book is divided up into different sections with these headings. The first section is really sort of the coming of age of our main character, Tracker, and also a sexual awakening. And so this is something that shows up throughout, that the author does not shy away from anything, whether it's gruesome violence or whether it's sex, both positive and negative in all different forms, and gay sex is present in this book, and in the crude humor that is throughout it, and in the language that is used. And so it is a major framework in this book, and so I think it's really interesting to read from. It's not something I've read before, and I think it provides a diversity of perspective that has been lacking in the genre. Okay, so in terms of plot, the basic plot of this book is this man named Tracker who has a nose where once he smells somebody's scent, he can track them until they're dead and find where they are. It's like kind of this magical ability. There is magic and lots of mythology in here, which is really, really rich and well crafted. But the man named Tracker, it's basically his coming of age in the early part, and he is in the present time in prison being interrogated and telling his story to the interrogator. And so we get everything from his sort of coming of age as a young teen boy when he leaves home and everything that happened to him there, all the way to what happens when he's asked to track a boy child and finds him, and lots of things happen. There are some surprising and crazy twists that happen, especially later in the books, and things that I didn't really see coming. That's sort of generally the plot of the book and what it follows. And I do think it nicely wraps up at the end, I will say. You could read this as a standalone. I'm curious to see where the rest of the trilogy will go, but he does give you enough of a conclusion that I think you could read this as a standalone and probably be satisfied with it. So let's talk a little bit about world building. That is something that I think is so richly done here. He crafts this richly realized, beautifully built world of this sort of dark Africa, and we do travel through the story. We see different people with different practices, and a lot of African mythology and mythological creatures get wrapped up into here. So clearly he did a lot of research and then deftly sort of weaves together all of these different mythologies and stories into this. One other thing that I thought was interesting that's kind of related to the mythology of it, that I think gets at some of the themes that he's talking about, is how we get explanations of some of these kind of terrible practices that have existed in places like Africa, and the reasoning behind them, which is interesting. So there's, in the first portion of the book, there's this explanation given of both circumcision and female genital mutilation, and it's essentially this idea that circumcision takes away the woman from the man, because there's like part woman born with every man and you want to remove it so that they can be really a man, and that female genital mutilation is taking out the man from the woman so that she can really be a woman and not be too masculine. So it's, I mean, obviously kind of insane, but it's given as this like explanation that like in this world makes sense even though it's terrible and has really bad consequences. So it's interesting because he kind of like unpacks the ways that these sorts of practices can become endemic in communities based on different belief systems, which I think is really interesting. Also, there's a lot of diversity in this book, even among skin tone, and a lot of discussion of it. You get everything from very dark skinned people where their skin is like a blue, black, all the way up to Middle Eastern people, and some discussion of white people who've traveled from the East. So this is sort of a mythological ancient Africa. There's an interesting situation that flips things a little bit, but unpacks this problem of exoticization of skin color and what happens when it's turned into this like exotic thing to acquire instead of person. So that is dealt with here. I mean, you just like, there's so much, guys. It's like so dense. You could go through and like reread this and tap it up, even, but like I don't know if I will anytime soon because it's really hard to read, but it is very well crafted, but hard to read and coarse. And then finally, I do want to talk a little bit about pacing so that you know what to expect going in. Like I said, this is divided up into sections. The first section of the book is really just sort of his boyhood and coming of age. I would say the first half of the book, and this is a long book, it's over 600 pages long, about the first half of it is very dark and gritty. I mean, there are dark things that happen throughout the book, but the first half in particular it feels near constant. Like I had to really pace myself. I couldn't binge read it because there were so many heavy, dark things happening. So just be aware going in that it's pretty intense, especially the first half of it. And also, a lot of this is non-linear storytelling. So this changes a little bit, I would say, in the second half of the book, but especially in the first half, you really have to pay close attention to what you're reading. Like I said, the story is being told by our main character, but sometimes this gets a little meta. So you might have him telling his story to the interrogator about something that happened, and in the story, he's telling somebody else a story, and in that story there might be a mythology that they're discussing. So there might be like multiple different timelines and different things that you have to keep track of, so that can get a little complicated. You do really have to pay close attention. This is not a book that you can just kind of breeze through. Now, the second half of the book is much more linear. I would say it's where the plot portion of the book becomes much more engaging and exciting, and things start really happening, and you get a little bit more intermittent bits that are lighter instead of it all feeling quite so dark. And so I was actually able to get through the second half of this book pretty quickly and found that I didn't really want to put it down. So that is something that changes in terms of the pacing from the first half of the book to the second half. So this is the thing. This is literary fantasy. And what that means is this is not intended to be a fun book to read, and most of the time it's not. Like, I didn't necessarily enjoy the process of reading most of it. A lot of it was really difficult to read, but I think that it's highlighting a lot of really important issues. I think it is amazingly well crafted, and it's clear that there's not a lot of excess material. Even though this is a book that's 600 pages long, everything has meaning and purpose, whether it's for world building or character development or plot progression or just tackling some of these big themes that he's dealing with throughout the book. So this is why I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I do think if you can deal with the content that is in it, it is worth reading and considering, but reader beware. Know what you're getting yourself into, because this is by no means a light book or something that you should think that you can breeze through. It is quite brutal, quite graphic, very, very intense. But I think well worth it. I don't regret reading it, and I will probably continue to read more from this author. I think you just need to be in the right frame of mind and be prepared for what I'm getting into. So there you go. Those are all of my thoughts on Black Leopard Red Wolf. I'm sure there's a lot more that could be said. Like I said, it is a tome, and he does so many things in this book. So talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know if any of you guys have read this book. I would love to have a discussion about it. Like I said, there's so much to it. And for those of you who haven't, let me know, is this something that you would consider picking up? Has my discussion of it changed your perspective in any way of whether you think this would or wouldn't be the book for you? I'm really curious to hear. Like I said, I think this is a book that lots of people are going to be talking about. It's probably going to get a lot of attention, and deservedly so, but I also think it is really not going to be the book for everybody. So there you go. Those are my thoughts. Talk to me in the comments down below. If you guys liked this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.